Welcome to 6 Feet into 6. I'm your host, Jeff Barrett with Business Interiors. Thank you for joining us today. The purpose of this interview series is for the close-knit Toronto commercial real estate industry to share ideas and best practices in order to help everyone get back to the office safely and efficiently. Joining us today is Peggie Rothe, Chief Insights and Research Officer at Leesman. Peggie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm, as you mentioned, Chief Insights and Research Officer at Leesman. And what that means really is that I lead the team at Leesman who looks after the massive database that we have and make most of that data around workplace experience. On the other hand, I also work very closely with a number of our clients, especially global ones, especially also the ones or some of our clients in the Nordics. Because I am actually based in Helsinki, Finland. You may not be able to pick that up from my accent, but I am actually Finnish, and that's where I'm based. I guess very briefly about my background, though, I've been passionate about workplaces pretty much my entire professional life. So I originally studied real estate valuation at university, but I realized already back then that I wasn't too interested in valuating buildings and kind of giving them a monetary value. Because in my mind back then, and how I see it also today, is that the value that comes from the built environment is the value that it brings to the users. And I especially thought that was true in office buildings, office environments. And yeah, I've been passionate ever since to understand how can we create office environments and workplaces that really bring value to both the employee and therefore also to the organization.
Well, you are our first guest that is not from Toronto. I was trying to keep it Toronto local, but I made an exception for Leesman because Toronto is very fond of Leesman, and you guys do spend a lot of time in Toronto in normal times. So thank you for joining me from the other side of the world. It's exciting to have an international guest here. Personally, how are you managing?
Yeah, I have to admit pretty well. I guess, the whole COVID situation, naturally it's had a lot of downsides and a lot of cons, but I've almost consciously tried to focus on the positives. And for me, I'm living a completely different life compared to what I was pre-COVID, because pre-COVID, I traveled a lot for work. At one point, I counted that I had like 140 days of travel in a year. That included my personal travel as well, though, but 140 days that I was not in Finland. And now I'm down to 0 days of travel a year, which means that I've found new sides of myself. I have completely new routines. I go for a morning walk. I do home exercises. I have started cooking a lot more. I love going to the grocery store and buying food for a week, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, fish, whatever, and cooking and baking. So in that sense, I'd say focusing on the positives, I've been doing pretty okay.
Can you show us what face masks you've been rocking?
Yeah, well, I think before I show you, I have to give you a bit of context around face masks in Finland, because we actually went through wave 1 without wearing face masks. Back in the spring, there was no general recommendation from the government to wear face masks, partly because they concluded that there wasn't going to be enough face masks available, and partly then combined with, I guess there was inconclusive research on whether reusable face masks were effective enough. So we had no general recommendation to wear face masks. You could take the bus and not wear a face mask back in the spring. And it wasn't until really a few months ago that we then finally got that recommendation. And now if you go to the grocery store, you'll see about 80-90% wearing a mask. It's not mandatory, but it is a strong recommendation. So I kind of had 2 waves of masks. Back in the spring, when still we didn't really do masks over here, my beloved sister, who actually lives in Canada, in Ottawa, she sent us some masks that she had ordered. So the first one I had, pattern-wise, not very exciting, but it is a Norwex face mask. So the cleaning company that provides various different different cleaning products. They did some masks, and my sister ordered some of them and sent over to Finland. Now then, when we actually got the recommendation, and I needed a few more, so I naturally went with some Finnish design. And I've been using this particular one is from Leesman. So nice pattern right there. And they have a few different ones. So I ordered a bunch just so that I could kind of, use a few different patterns as I liked, kind of thing.
Can you tell me about your book of business and how it's been affected by COVID-19?
Yes, I think considering that Leesman measures the experience, or we used to measure the experience of workplaces and office workplaces, quite naturally, when all of a sudden most people are working from home and nobody's in the office, that was going to have an impact on us in one way or the other. Now, luckily, we had some amazing clients who we've worked with consistently before or repeatedly before, who had a lot of sites and locations in Asia, who were quite, as we all know, ahead of us in the pandemic, and who basically were quite early in asking us to help them measure the homeworking experience. So they were facing a situation where the offices were empty far before everywhere else in the world. And they were trying to figure out, well, how was it working for them? So they approached us and asked us, well, since you have a methodology to measure, our office experience, could you do the same for the homeworking experience? So it was pretty much end of February, early March, when we started developing a new tool that would measure, a standardized tool that would measure the homeworking experience. And that was ready, questions finalized, the tool up and running by end of March. And for a while then, what we were focused on was helping organizations measuring the experience that their people were having working from home.
I feel like the organizations that engaged people like yourselves or like a sensor company to collect space utilization data, like they're so far ahead of the game right now because they have that baseline to work from. And I see your type of measuring the experience being so valuable as we make our way back to the office. So first off, if you had the data pre-COVID, then you kind of know what your baseline is and where you hope to get back to if you had a high performing office. And so as we make these tweaks and slowly make our way back to the office, the experience is going to evolve and change over time. So it's really exciting to see a company like yours going to be able to thrive in this. But how important or how far behind do you feel a company is if they don't have that baseline to work from right now?
I think it's not too late to pick it up. I mean, if you don't have a baseline, if you don't know what the quality, if you don't have the quality of the quality of your office from before COVID, naturally at that point you have no idea what employees were thinking about it and how, to what extent they may be tempted to come back. But I would say it's not too late to measure it now, and we are working actually with quite a lot of organizations who are in a situation where they need that data now in order to make decisions long term. And even though employees are currently working from home, they still choose to do a survey asking, thinking back at your office pre-COVID, how did it work for you? And it still gives them a sense of how would the employees rate it. And it actually, in one way, you could almost argue that it gives an even more accurate rating, even though it's based on memory, but it's based on their memory and what they're feeling now after having had an alternative. So even if now, because you work from home and certain things have been working really well, or some other things have been working really poorly, if you remember the office in a different way now because of this experience, that is still what you're thinking now, which is kind of what matters. I mean, I'm going a bit philosophical now here, but basically that's really what matters, because that is determining whether the employee is keen to go back or not. So my message there would definitely be that it's not too late at all. And the best thing that you can do at this point then is to measure it now and get that data. Because once it's actually time to make the decisions about what to do, at that point, it is too late to prepare. So the time to prepare is absolutely now.
That's really interesting, because I've had conversations with people where I've suggested against doing that type of research, because it's like, well, we've been out of the office too long, and I was worried that the data wouldn't be accurate. But that's a great perspective, because now it's a baseline. It's something to actually measure off. Now that you don't have it, you might feel differently about missing some of those features, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly things that that we see have worked really well now that people have been at home. Those may be rated more like poorly in the office, because you have a completely different comparison for it now. So your expectations may have increased quite a bit after this home experience, and the other way around. I mean, there are certain things that you perhaps didn't understand to value as much in the office before. Very practical example, chair. Many people are sitting, just like I am, at a dining chair that is not good for 8 hours of sitting. Not that I know whether any chair is good for 8, or whether sitting for 8 hours is good in any chair, but nonetheless, I think having now used a dining chair, for all these months, I think I have learned to appreciate the proper ergonomic office chairs in a completely different way. So there are things that actually may be more valued now in the office, just because the experience of them at home have been so poor.
What types of changes do you see coming to the commercial office long-term post-COVID? I know your crystal ball is broken, but try.
Yeah. I hope to see that more organizations understand that their office is important, and you need to give the employees a compelling reason to come there. So I hope that we're going to see more and more organizations, or an increase in number of organizations who do put emphasis in thinking about how can we create the best possible office environment for our employees, considering that they may now be working in a different way. How the actual office will look like, what the design of it will be. I know that there's a lot of kind of conversation floating around whether the office in the future should more be a place for meetings and place that you go to meet your colleagues and social interaction and so forth. I don't think that that's going to be the case, because individual focused work is basically the hygiene factor of knowledge work. It's something that every single, or pretty much every single, knowledge worker does as a part of their role. And it's very important. And it's also one of the super drivers. It's just not practical to think that you would stay, for example, at home and do your individual work one day, and then you go to the office just to socialize and being meetings all day. That's not really how work works. A normal day in a knowledge worker's everyday life is much more kind of fluid and alternating between between collaboration and individual work. So I certainly foresee, and I also very much hope that we don't go down a path where we start designing offices just for collaboration, because people still need to do their individual focused work. So I think that's what I hope to see. And I think we need to remember that even though our data generally shows that individual work is the stuff that is generally, on average, better supported at home versus in the office.
For the product review section, what we were doing was looking at products that were relevant to COVID, whether they are a new product in response or an old product that has recently gained some relevancy. Unfortunately, I'm running out of products to talk about, and so I've used this time to give the guest the floor to present something that they're working on. So, Peggy, the floor is yours. I'm really interested to hear what Leesman is working on, and I'll provide some commentary after.
Thank you. All right, so I thought I'd use this opportunity to actually do a little bit of a recap and explain again in a bit more detail what we do at Leesman, and then what we've been focused on for the past, well, however many months it's been. So really kind of looking at measuring the homeworking experience. But before that, so in a nutshell, what we do at Leesman, we have one purpose. It's to help create better places of work. And the simple way that we work towards this purpose is by measuring the experience that people have of those places. And that's really all we do. So we measure the experience. What we don't do is provide consultancy or advisory or design environments or anything like that. So really how you can look at us is as the radiographers of the workplace. So we take an X-ray of the workplace, which helps us see what's working, what's not. We may be able to identify that, you know, there are some tensions over there that don't quite work and or that are causing problems over here. But we're not the doctors or the physiotherapists who then basically kind of fix the problems. And you may wonder, well, why don't we do that part as well? And the simple answer is really that we want to stay completely independent from in our measurement. So we're offering a completely independent measurement that does not then create consultancy work for us, nor do we measure, for example, environments that we have first designed for you. So think of us as the workplace radiographers. The way we do this measurement is by asking people. So we have standardized surveys that ask people how they're experiencing the environment and how it's supporting them in the things that they do. We've collected a whole heap of data already. And with all that data, and considering that we are completely independent, we basically then do three different things. We offer benchmarking. So any organization that does our survey gets a comparison of how their environments are working compared to all the other environments that we have measured. The second thing we do, because we've measured so many workplaces, is that we can we can identify the high performers. So we can acknowledge the ones that are getting really outstanding scores. So we have a certification program for this, which is called Leesman Plus. And then the last thing we can do with all this data is we can do research and crunch the numbers and look for interesting insights that we then share widely with the community to help everyone basically create better workplaces, regardless of whether they are working with us or not. And when I said we have a whole lot of data on the office experience that we were focused on before in measuring, we collected over 800,000 respondents. But now we've shifted, or we've included in our focus as well the homeworking experience. And we launched our new questions measuring the homeworking experience just end of March. And by the end of September, we had already collected nearly 150,000 responses from more than 80 different countries around the world. So a whole heap of data to share insights from. And I wanted to share some insights based on this data. Before that, though, just very briefly, kind of a run through what is it that we're asking in these surveys when we measure experience. Now, this particular structure is, the question structure is for the homeworking assessment. It follows the same structure as our original office survey as well. So what we start off with is we have 21 activities that we ask which activities are important to you and how well are those supported in your environment. We have some general statements, how, you know, to what extent do you agree with the statements about your environment enables you to work productively and supports a sense of connection and so forth. And then out of those two sections, we calculate our main KPI, which is called the LMI when we talk about offices. When we talk about the home environment, we talk about the home LMI, so HLMI abbreviated. And then we have questions around which features are important to you and how satisfied you are with those. And naturally a number of background questions basically to be able to do some interesting comparisons in the data. And yeah, so that's the kind of structure of the survey and what we actually do. So I wanted to share a few insights on, well, how is home working now based on the data. And the best way really to kind of put it in a nutshell is to look at that HLMI score. So the overall score for home experience, which sits at 74.2. Now, to give you a bit of a reference point, the average LMI across offices, the average experience of an office environment across the world sits at 63. And the threshold for an outstanding experience is drawn at 70. So basically, on average, the experience of working from home has in fact been quite good. And we see that also in other questions in the survey. So one of the main questions that I mentioned is, does your environment enable you to work productively? More than 80% of the respondents who have responded about their home environments have said that yes, it does. And the equivalent for the office database that we have is 63. So again, we see that the home on average is experienced to support productivity better than the home environment is better at supporting productivity than the office environment on average. But there's the big but then. We need to remember that averages are averages, and they may mask some highs and lows. And even though over 60% of employees worldwide have an outstanding experience working from home, we find that there's still a significant proportion of employees who are not having a good experience working from home. And to be more exact, it's over 20%. So more than 1 in 5 have reported an actual poor experience with an HLMI score that sits below 60. And that also, if we then look at from one organization to another, we see the same thing. So when we compare the different organizations who have done the survey, the highest score so far for any organization, over 80, the lowest, just over 50. So even between organizations, we can say that there are quite significant differences in how home working has been experienced. And just to give you a sense of, well, what are those differences, we had a look at what are the things that are generally going well for most people and for most organizations, and what are the things where the gaps between the good scoring organizations and the poor scoring organizations are the biggest. And on the left-hand side, we have those things that basically all organizations who have done the survey have received a good score. And that's about having access to information, the environment enabling you to work productively, doing your individual work, and having kind of different sorts of planned formal meetings. Now, the things that are not performing as well are basically then kind of the more collaborative things. So yes, on one hand, we find that we have access to information, but it is challenging to share knowledge. We find that the environment is good for our productivity, and we can do our individual work, but we're not feeling connected to our colleagues and to the organization, and we can't collaborate. And we can do our formal planned meetings, but informal, unplanned meetings and more social interaction, has been very challenging in some organizations. So finally, I just wanted to then kind of reflect on, well, how does that then compare to the office experience? I gave some insights on how it compared overall to our entire office database, but I want to kind of end this on a pretty funky looking chart, which is a comparison of the HLMI versus the LMI. So this, the data that I'm going to show here is from over 13,000 respondents who have recently done our survey measuring both the office and the home experience at the same time. And what we can do then is basically compare what is the individual employees HLMI and LMI, and basically plot it on a chart. And this is what it looks like. So as you can see, we've got a proportion of employees, the ones in the top right-hand corner, the 37%, who have an outstanding office experience indicated by the LMI, and also have an outstanding home experience indicated by the HLMI. There are some people who have an outstanding or had an outstanding experience in the office, but a poor experience at home, the 18% in the left top corner. And basically for them, I mean, if we generalize, we could guess that they are dying to get back to the office. They are really waiting to get back to the office. The bottom right-hand corner is those who have a good experience at home, but a poor experience waiting for them in the office. They are probably quite happy to remain working from home for quite a bit. And then unfortunately, we've got 25% in the left bottom corner who have a poor experience both in the office and at home. And I think there really the organization needs to figure out, how do we improve these guys' experience generally? Do we improve the office? Is there anything we can do to improve their home experience, or what are we doing? And what this really also says, and what I want to leave you with is, it really shows how we are all individuals. So even though I've shared some general insights and some averages, every single 13,000 dot on this chart represents an individual. And you can see that there are very many different types of experiences from highs and lows on both dimensions.
Peggy, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. I noticed that on the last graph that there are several zeros for the home office experience, but the office experience didn't ever get a zero. That's interesting. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I assume that must be employees who are really having an extremely poor experience now that they are working from home. And I mean, what we've seen in the data is that one of the things that has the strongest bearing on your experience at home is the type of setting you have available to you at home. So those employees who have an actual dedicated room for working at home generally tend to have a much better experience versus the other extreme, where you are working from a setting that is actually not even dedicated or meant for working at all. So you're sitting by the dining table or in the kitchen or on the couch or whatever. So my best guess is that it's a few of those people who really, it's really not working for them at home.
Is there any data around the demographics on age? You know, are the younger folks enjoying it more because they don't have children or other distractions?
It's a good question. And to give a bit of context, when we look at the office experience, the general trend is, and what we've been seeing for years and what we see with most organizations, is that the younger employees actually have the best experience in the office environment. How we've explained that is that they're young, they're in the beginning of their careers, they don't have as much responsibility, they don't do as many different things, they require less of the environment than their older colleagues. So contrary to all the talk about the younger generations being very demanding and hard to please, actually our data shows that generally they are most satisfied with the office environment. Now, we were, of course, really looking forward to seeing what is the data then showing when we're looking at the home experience. And the pattern has kind of changed as we've collected more and more data. Originally, we started seeing a very clear pattern that it was basically the reverse pattern to the office. So if the young employees had a better experience in the office and the older ones a poor experience in the office, it was the reverse. The younger employees were having a poorer experience at home, and the older employees a better experience. That pattern has kind of evened itself out a bit, and it's quite flatlined at the moment. So I can't say that there's a really big difference between the oldest and the youngest. And I think that is actually caused by two different things. What is kind of pulling the experience down for the younger employees is that they are most likely not to have a setting in their home that they have dedicated for working. They may be flat sharing and have other people around. So that's pulling down their experience. What's kind of helping it increase, on the other hand, is what I said about the office experience, that they do less different things. And if you have a more kind of a narrower variety of different things that you do, it's easier for the environment to support that. And therefore, what we've found is it's kind of a flatlined. So not a big difference between the younger and the older employees.
Is there any data point on an organization that has invested in home office furniture versus the ones who do not, and if the experience is better after that?
Unfortunately, we don't have that background information of the organizations that have done the survey with us. But certainly when we have gone through the results with individual clients and, for example, reflecting on the scores of desk and chair, among other things, some may have commented that, you know, they have given an allowance, but the reality is that an allowance to get a chair or a desk or both, it may not help everyone, because if you are in a small apartment and you don't have anywhere to put that, then, you know, you're going to potentially even have to turn the offer down because you simply don't have the space for it.
One more question. In terms of industries, is there any industry specific data that one is performing better than another?
No, there's not really any clear pattern that we would have seen. I mean, we are very strict with our data in the sense that we want to feel comfortable that we have data from enough different organizations within an industry before we kind of conclude that represents the industry. And just from having seen the results of many different organizations, I would say they vary regardless of industry. So we've got, for example, furniture organizations that furniture companies that we work with, we've seen some really good scores, and we've seen some pretty bad scores for their employees' home working experience. So I can't really say that there's any particular industry that has really done it well. Or better than anyone else, just generally.
Peggy, is there anything else you want the Six to know about you or Leesman and how you're joining the fight against COVID-19?
Yeah, I guess the message really is that we're here to help you guys understand the future workplace landscape in your organization. And even though we work towards our purpose by sharing general insights, I do want to kind of put that big disclaimer up there and say, don't make the mistakes of looking at general numbers and kind of applying that to your organization and thinking that it represents your organization. The best way really to make decisions about what to do in your organization going forward is to get the data on yourself. And naturally, we are more than happy to help in that by measuring either the workplace experience, as in the office, or the home working experience, or both, and providing you some really interesting insights on how your employees are experiencing the situation.
Well, thank you, Peggy, for sharing how you and Leesman are joining the fight against COVID-19. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Toronto, you are the best city in the world, and we can't wait for you to feel better again. I have seen the lighting change as we've been talking. You have a shadow where you didn't have a shadow before.
It's not pitch black yet, so that's a good thing. I think another 20 minutes and it's going to be pitch black outside.
Yeah,
so.
It wasn't that dramatic. I noticed part when I was talking. Like, if you ever see me do this, it's because the lighting is changing in my window, and my camera like picks it up really awful, and it like my face lights up like a Christmas tree sometimes. So